Hey there, deep diving friend. Ready to get a little wild? We're diving into Ray Dalio's How the Economic Machine Works, and let me tell you, this is going to be a ride. You know those economic booms and busts everyone's always talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Today, we're going to break those down, like really unpack how they happen.
Dalio's model is perfect for that.
I've heard that.
It's like he wrote the instruction manual for the entire economy.
Literally.
And honestly, who couldn't use a little more, clarity when it comes to that?
100%. So, way do we even begin with something as massive and complex as, like, the entire economy?
Believe it or not, we start small. Like, really small.
Well,
Think about buying your morning coffee.
Okay, hold on. How does my latte habit fit into all of this?
That's exactly what Dalio wants us to see. He starts with these little transactions, these everyday purchases, because they're the tiny engines that power the whole thing. Every purchase, from that coffee to a new car, it's all part of this massive, interconnected web of exchanges.
Yeah. Okay, I think I see what you're saying, how it all connects. But engines need fuel, right?
Mm.
So what's the fuel that keeps this economic machine chugging along?
Credit.
Credit.
Credit. It's the gasoline, the electricity, the whole energy source of the economic world. Dalio argues it's the most important and the least understood factor in how the whole thing works.
Really? More important than money itself?
Think about it this way.
Yeah.
Credit lets us spend more than we actually earn right now.
True.
It's like borrowing from your future self to buy that big screen TV today.
Yeah, instant gratification, I get it. But we all know borrowing, especially too much of it, can be, a recipe for disaster. How does that play into things?
That's where debt cycles come in.
Debt cycles.
Yeah, so credit's like this double-edged sword. It fuels growth by, encouraging people to spend, but it also creates these booms and busts, these predictable ups and downs in the economy.
So it's like a roller coaster we can't get off.
In a way, yeah. Dalio lays out two main cycles. There's a short-term debt cycle that's about 5 to 8 years long,
Okay.
and then there's a much longer one that plays out over 75 to 100 years.
Wow. Okay. So let's start with the shorter one because honestly, that sounds a little more manageable. What happens in those 5 to 8 years?
Okay, so picture this. Things are good. Credit is easy to get. Interest rates are low. Everyone's feeling optimistic.
That sounds nice.
Right? So naturally, people start borrowing more, spending more, businesses invest more.
Makes sense.
And as all this economic activity heats up, prices start to rise. That's inflation kicking in.
And that's where things start to get a little unstable, right?
Exactly. Inflation is like the warning sign,
Right.
At this point, the central bank, think of them as the referees in this whole economic game. They often step in to cool things down.
Okay, how do they do that?
Their main tool, interest rates. They raise interest rates.
To make it more expensive to borrow.
Exactly. When borrowing gets more expensive, people naturally start spending less. Businesses pump the brakes on big investments and things like cool down.
So it's a constant balancing act.
A constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And, if they raise interest rates too much or too quickly, the economy could slow down too much, and that's how we dip into a recession.
Ah, I see. Okay, so that's the short-term cycle in a nutshell.
Pretty much, yeah.
What about that longer one, that's 75 to 100-year cycle? That one feels a lot harder to wrap my head around.
It is, but bear with me. What's fascinating about the long-term cycle is that it's all about this, gradual buildup of debt. Over decades.
Decades.
Yeah, we're talking generations here. And for a really long time, things might seem great, incomes are rising, asset values are going up.
People get comfortable.
Yeah, and people feel like the good times will never end.
That's dangerous thinking, though, isn't it? Assuming things will continue on that trajectory forever.
It is.
Yeah.
Remember how we were saying credit is like the fuel? Well, over these long periods, debt, the other side of that credit coin, keeps piling up in the background.
Oh, wow. So it's like we're building this incredible tower higher and higher, but the foundation is getting shakier and shakier.
That's a great way to put it. This period of prosperity, it can be really seductive. It lulls people into this, false sense of security.
You get complacent.
Totally. Like a frog in a pot of gradually heating water. It doesn't realize the danger until it's too late.
And then what happens? The bubble bursts.
Eventually, yeah. Debt burdens become too heavy. People and even entire institutions can't keep up with their repayments anymore. And the whole system, it starts to unravel.
I'm guessing this is where that word deleveraging comes in.
You got it. Deleveraging is the downside of this long-term debt cycle. It's the painful process of unwinding all of that accumulated debt.
So if the long-term cycle is all about accumulating debt, what does deleveraging actually look like in the real world? Is it like hitting a giant reset button on the economy?
Not quite a full reset, but it
Ugh.
can definitely feel like a crash landing. Imagine, imagine a family that's been like living large on credit cards for years,
Yeah.
buying a bigger house, a fancy car, all on borrowed money. Everything seems great until it isn't.
Right, the bills come due.
Exactly. The bills start piling up and they realize they can't keep up with the payments. That's deleveraging on a personal level.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a stark picture. But it happens on a much larger scale too, right? Governments, entire countries.
Absolutely. Countries can find themselves in a similar position, especially if they've been spending beyond their means for a long time,
Yeah,
racking up debt.
it's easy to do, it seems.
It is. It is. Think about it. Less spending by people. That means businesses suffer, tax revenues drop, and governments. Well, they might even struggle to pay off their own debts.
So deleveraging isn't just an individual problem, it's systemic, right? This ripple effect that impacts everyone.
Exactly. And that's why it's often associated with, periods of economic hardship.
Yeah.
Things like spending cuts, job losses.
Mm.
We might even see a full-blown depression.
It sounds pretty bleak when you put it like that. Is there any way to make deleveraging less painful? Or is it just something we have to, like, grit our teeth and get through?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dalio argues that while deleveraging is tough, it can also be a time for renewal. A beautiful deleveraging, as he calls it.
A beautiful deleveraging. Now, that's an interesting way to put it. How can something that sounds so negative actually be a good thing?
It's all about perspective. And,
Well-
making smart choices. Think of it like this. Imagine a forest that's become overgrown and choked with dead wood, a wildfire, while destructive.
It clears the way for new growth.
Exactly.
So you're saying that deleveraging, while painful, can actually clear out the excesses in the system and make way for a healthier, more sustainable economy.
Exactly. It's about using that period of correction to address the root causes of the crisis and find a more sustainable balance between debt and growth.
And I'm guessing this is where the central bank steps in again, right? Our referees from before.
You know it. The central bank plays a crucial role during a deleveraging year. They got a whole toolbox of strategies they can use to, smooth out the bumps and prevent a complete economic meltdown.
What kind of tools are we talking about here? Give us a peek behind the curtain.
Well, one of their most powerful tools is adjusting interest rates. We talked about how they raise rates to combat inflation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But during deleveraging, they might actually do the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, they might lower interest rates, like, near zero.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they even make borrowing basically free.
Wait, why would they do that? Isn't
Yeah.
that like adding fuel to the fire?
It seems counterintuitive, but the goal is to encourage borrowing and spending to stimulate the economy. Remember, during deleveraging, everyone's pulling back, so the central bank is trying to incentivize people to start spending again.
I see. So they're trying to jumpstart the engine by making it as cheap as possible to borrow money.
Exactly. And that's not all. They can also inject money directly into the economy.
How do they do that?
It's a process called quantitative easing. It's a bit complex.
I-
But basically, they create new money electronically and use it to buy government bonds or other assets.
So they're essentially just pumping money into the system to get things moving again.
Pretty much. Now, all of these measures, they come with risks, of course. Printing too much money can lead to inflation, and keeping interest rates low for too long can create new bubbles.
Right, so it's all about finding that balance again.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act. The central bank has to walk this tightrope between stimulating the economy and preventing things from spiraling out of control.
It's a high-stakes game for sure. This is all incredibly fascinating, but I have to ask, how does this connect back to our everyday lives? It's easy to feel disconnected from these, like, massive economic forces.
That's a great question, and it's crucial to remember. These cycles, these booms and busts, they don't just play out on spreadsheets and in boardrooms, They impact our lives, our jobs, our ability to plan for the future.
So what you're saying is, even if we don't fully grasp all the intricacies of deleveraging or quantitative easing, we're all living with the consequences of these economic forces.
100%. Think about it. When the economy takes a downturn, businesses lay off workers, people cut back on spending, it becomes harder to get a loan. On the flip side, when the economy is booming, jobs are plentiful, wages rise, businesses thrive.
Okay, that makes sense. But it still feels like we're at the mercy of these larger forces, like we're just along for the ride.
That's where Dalio's model is so helpful. He doesn't want us to be passive passengers. He wants us to understand the mechanics of the economic machine so we can make more informed decisions, navigate those ups and downs more effectively.
So it's about empowering ourselves with knowledge.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something as important as the economy.
Okay, I'm all for feeling empowered, but where do we even begin? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this talk of economic forces and cycles. What can the average person actually do with this knowledge?
That's where Dalio's work is so brilliant. He doesn't just explain how the system works, he gives us practical tools to navigate it. Remember those 3 rules of thumb we talked about earlier?
Vaguely. Yeah, remind me.
Of course. First, don't let debt grow faster than your income.
Okay.
Second, don't let your income rise faster than your productivity.
Right.
And third, focus on boosting your productivity for long-term success.
Got it. Simple but important.
Exactly. These rules might seem simple, maybe even obvious, but they're grounded in a really deep understanding of how the economic machine operates.
Okay, so rule number 1 is all about keeping our debt in check.
Precisely. It's about living within your means, making conscious choices about your spending, and not relying on credit to fund a lifestyle you can't truly afford in the long run.
Easier said than done in today's world.
Absolutely. We're bombarded with messages telling us to buy now, pay later. But Dalio's model encourages us to, pause and ask ourselves, do I really need this? Can I afford the repayments without stressing my finances?
It's about being honest with ourselves and maybe resisting the urge to keep up with the Joneses a bit.
Exactly. And remember, not all debt is bad debt.
Yeah.
Investing in a home or starting a business often requires taking on some debt.
Right, it's about leverage.
Exactly. But the key is to manage that debt responsibly. Make sure it's an investment that has the potential to generate future income or appreciate in value.
So it's not about avoiding debt entirely. It's about being strategic and mindful about it. What about rule number 2, not letting our income outpace our productivity?
That's a good one. That one's all about making sure your earnings are justified by the value you're creating. If you're getting a raise or a promotion, fantastic.
Right.
Celebrate that. But it should be because you've become more skilled, more knowledgeable, more valuable to your employer or your clients, not just because the economy is, in a temporary upswing.
So it's about investing in ourselves, constantly striving to improve our skills and knowledge.
You got it. Think of it this way. You wouldn't expect a stock to go up in value if the underlying company wasn't performing well.
Yeah, right.
The same goes for our careers. If we want to see our stock rise, meaning our earning potential, we need to focus on building a solid foundation of skills and expertise.
I like that analogy. Okay, on to rule number 3, boosting productivity. This one sounds like a no-brainer, but how do we actually become more productive?
It starts with, taking a hard look at yourself and identifying areas where you could improve. Are there new skills you could learn that would make you more efficient? Can you streamline your workflow? Automate repetitive tasks? Are there tools or technologies you could be leveraging to work smarter, not harder?
It's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment, Try new approaches and see what works best for you. Productivity isn't about being perfect. It's about constantly striving to improve.
I love that. This has been incredibly eye-opening. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. The idea that we're not just passive passengers in this economic machine. We actually have the power to influence it through our choices.
That's what's so empowering about Dalio's model. We're not helpless bystanders. Every decision we make, whether it's buying a coffee, investing in our education, or starting a business, it all sends ripples through the economy.
So how do we become more conscious participants? How can understanding these cycles help us make better financial decisions in our own lives?
It allows us to anticipate potential risks and opportunities. For example, knowing that interest rates tend to rise after a period of economic growth, well, that might encourage you to lock in a low fixed-rate mortgage when you have the chance.
And if you're aware of the cyclical nature of the stock market, you're less likely to panic sell during a downturn and more likely to see it as a buying opportunity.
Exactly. It's about becoming a more informed investor, a more strategic consumer, a more empowered participant in the economy.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We explored the mechanics of economic growth, the dangers of excessive debt, and the importance of productivity.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We did. But most importantly, we learned that we're not just along for the ride. We have the power to influence the course.
And remember, the economy isn't this abstract thing. It's the sum total of all of our collective choices. By understanding how it works and by making informed decisions, we can create a more stable, more prosperous future for everyone.
That's an inspiring thought to end on. So as you go about your day, consider the economic implications of your actions. Are you spending, saving, or investing in a way that aligns with your understanding of the economic machine? Food for thought. And that wraps up our deep dive into Ray Dalio's model of the economic machine. Until next time, happy navigating, everyone.